Tourette's podcast is not a medical advice show. It's a show about experiences. In the course of that, we may talk about medications or therapies or stories from the doctor's office, but don't mistake any of that for medical advice or direction. It's not. Get that only from people or places licensed or certified to give it. Not from a massively fun and action-packed podcast about our life experiences, such as...
It's equally important for us to take what we learned and share it with people living with Tourette's and sharing it with people who are doing the science so that we make sure that the science that's being done really reflects the needs of the community.
This is Tourette's podcast, made possible with support of the Tourette Association of America and part of the Geeks Rising Network.
Hey, good morning. It's that time of the year again, May 15th. So May 15th to June 15th is Tourette Syndrome Awareness Month. And once again, I'm your host, Fabulous Tourette.
Hey everyone. May 15th through June 15th is Tourette Syndrome Awareness Month. And with that in mind, I wanted to make a few videos answering your questions. So if you have any questions about Tourette Syndrome, my tics in my job, or just anything, drop it in the comments below, and I'll be making videos answering those. All right? Good luck out there.
I'll let you know that May 15th through June 15th is Tourette's Awareness Month. If you don't know this, I have Tourette syndrome myself. My oldest son has Tourette syndrome. So Tourette's Awareness Month is a wonderful time where you get to kind of learn about Tourette's, learn about what it's like to have Tourette's, stuff like that. So I want to give you guys some really good options if you would like to look into it. Number one, the Tourette's podcast right there. Amazing podcast that Ben runs have been on it. It's awesome. Tons of awesome people with Tourette's have been on it. Next up, TourettesAssociation.org. Boom, right there. Click the links. And then also at my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/DadBobPlays all month long, I'll be talking about Tourette's. If you want to come in and you have any questions, hit me with them. I'll be glad to answer them. Well, love you guys. Thank you so much for the love and support, and have a wonderful day.
Hey everybody, so excited about this episode and what's ahead. First off, happy Tourette Awareness Month. Those are a few examples of awareness messages being spread out on social media from people who have TS. From Peter Zhao, at Fabulously Tourette, from Anthony Flaherty, and from Tourette's Cop. All people who've been on the podcast before, telling their life stories and how TS has been a factor. So many examples on social media right now of people opening up to their friends and coworkers and so on with videos or written posts about how May 15th through June 15th is Tourette Awareness Month. And I've seen some people say, well, it should always be about awareness, beyond just 1 month. And that's true, but now is the signal boost where we have a lot of great ambassadorship, hopefully in reach of people who have the wrong impression of what TS is and how people live with it, making that impression in a memorable way that does last more than just 1 month for the people who get the message. That TS is a real diagnosis. Kids and adults live with it. It's profoundly life-affecting in great and not so great ways, but even those not so great ways create an important kind of perspective. And learning about how scientifically interesting Tourette syndrome is will have way more branches and ripples than a joke someone made once that doesn't have quite the level of surprise or originality it once thought it offered the world. If you're an everyday comedian listening to this and you're working on a Tourette joke, may the new material fairy come and visit you tonight. But we don't have to stay hung up on that. Like I said, way more interesting things happening. I hope you were able to catch at least some of the Tourette Association of America's virtual conference last week. I know a lot of you did. Focuses on culture, on science, on therapies, what the future looks like for TS. So awesome that the Tourette Association did all that for free. Of course, hardly anything of value is actually free. It's got to be generated somewhere. And this was courtesy of people who generously donate to the Tourette Association. These are tax-deductible gifts. If you give to TAA, then you're supporting their work on research, stigma reduction, and the programming and education they do, including this free conference they just did. Go to touretteconference.org to catch up. There's a bunch of videos there right now of the sessions. Excellent free education on the state of Tourette syndrome. Please go check it out, touretteconference.org. Very happy to have gotten good feedback about the last episode with Bryson Jones and his father Kyle, both of whom have TS and have seen some personal success for Bryson in the discipline and focus of martial arts. My buddy Christopher in the UK said in the Tourette's podcast discussion group, Kias are great. I've had to stop karate clubbing for a while now, but being able to make that much noise and using the entire body to generate it is an opportunity rarely available in modern life. And the loss of it definitely had a negative impact on my TS. Christopher, thanks. That was representative of other comments I got, that the expression of martial arts either offers this meditation-like separation from the dimension in which ticks live and thrive, or it's this big expulsion of energy that seems to offer similar satisfaction. I'm no scientist, we're just riffing on this, or I am. But we do have a scientist coming up on this episode. One of my absolute favorites. Back to that in a second. Got just a couple more news items. If you know who Lily Pons is, you might be one of her 40 million Instagram followers. A video just went up about how she lives with Tourette syndrome and OCD and ADHD and the effects of being bullied. And it's a really cool break. If you think about people who have a celebrity status on Instagram, it's a really cool break in the narrative that we often, afford really popular people on social media, that their life seems perfect. And, I wish I didn't have these things like Tourette in my life that I have to be ashamed of. Wouldn't it be great to be like these perfect people on Instagram with 40 million followers? And I mean, yeah, that'd be cool. But the point here is that's not a true narrative. There's real life behind these people. And Lily opens up about that. I'll put that up in the post about this episode at tourettespodcast.com. Lily Pons talking about what she lives with, Tourette syndrome, OCD, ADHD. And one of my favorite lines from that half-hour video is, quote, "You can't really create cultural impact without being a little bit off-center," end quote, which I've always found to be true. If you just have the same thing all the time, what changes? Change takes perspective from people who can see from the outside and offer commentary about what's going on in the center. So appreciate what's different about yourself because it's clearly valuable. Okay, last thing, Geeks Rising, the podcast network that brings Tourette's podcast to a fantastic general audience, is participating in Livestream for the Cure on May 29th, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, livestreamforthecure.com. The goal of that event is to raise $10,000 for cancer research. Shout out to my amazing dad, who's been through a lot with cancer, and he's beating it back pretty vigorously with the right kinds of treatment and medical expertise. Clearly, I think it's worth participating in efforts to further our understanding of this stuff. Also, thanks to Geeks Rising for putting up a banner at geeksrising.com, a banner celebrating Tourette Awareness Month. Again, May 15th through June 15th. Awareness is the word on this episode, but in a somewhat different sense. We're about to talk to one of my top favorite Tourette scientists, and we're going to talk about, at least one of the things we get to here, is about how the science community and the Tourette community can be more aware of one another, more connected, actually working with one another. So the work scientists do has more direct significance to the community. And so the community knows what kind of work is going on and can participate. Dr. Christine Conolea is a name you've totally heard me mention on the show multiple times. She's been a science advisor to this podcast because I need that. That's who we're talking to on this episode. And we cover a lot of fascinating ground with regard to Tourette's science, where we're going with it, but to set the tone and really kind of prove her sincerity. The very first time I heard from her was back in, it was either season 1 or the beginning of season 2 of Tourette's podcast. Like really early on. She sent in this question.
Hi, Ben. This is Christine Conolea reaching out to you from Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I'm a scientist and a clinical psychologist who focuses on Tourette's. I have 2 questions for you that relate to these different jobs I do. First, what aspect of Tourette's do you most wish scientists would study? In other words, if you could set the research agenda, what would be your top priority? Second, I'm wondering what you wish healthcare professionals most understood about what it's like to have Tourette's. Thanks.
I hope you appreciate the spirit of that. She was directly reaching out, asking what's important to the community from a science standpoint, like building that bridge. Not long after, Dr. Conelea was instrumental in pulling together the Treating Tourette Together Summit in Minneapolis, Minnesota. That's where Dr. Conelea works. Bringing together Touretters, Tourette doctors, and Tourette scientists to talk on the same page about what needs to happen between them for the best outcomes. I was very thankful to be included in that event. I got to moderate a panel. That was a highlight for me. The Tourette science and medicine people are cool. Here's our conversation this week with one of them. We talk about Cbit and the frequent challenges people have in accessing it and what we're trying to do about that. Remember Bryson and Kyle from the last episode? They couldn't find Cbit in their area at all. We talk about research, and we talk about what we really mean when we're talking about treating Tourette and applying scientific advancements to this disorder that's a central, and in many cases proud part of the lives of the people who have it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Christine Conolea, and I am an assistant professor and a clinical psychologist at the University of Minnesota. I'm in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences, and so I work in Minneapolis, and I live in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Yeah, and we've interacted for quite some time now via the podcast, which has been a lot of fun because I've learned a lot from you about what I live with. And I guess, as I keep saying on the show, that I'm not an expert on Tourette syndrome. I know my own experiences, and I can kind of reach out and talk to other people about their experiences, but that's about it. Except for the due diligence of, if I'm going to be communicating about this stuff, I should probably educate myself too. And you've been a huge help in that, to kind of keep me out of the ditch and make sure the pseudoscience doesn't bleed in, and I'm not saying anything out of school. You and Dr. Capriati have been great with that, and but also you guys are really enterprising. I really like, with the Treating Tourette Together Summit, and there's a lot of really, I guess, goodwill things going on through you guys for the Tourette community. Just to kind of color it in a little bit, why are you interested in this field? What drew you to it?
That's a great question, because I love working in the Tourette's field. Both the scientific community and the community of people living with tics are such a wonderful group of people to be working with. So what got me into studying Tourette's was graduate school. And so I did my undergraduate at the University of Nevada, Reno, where I grew up. And I got really interested. I actually started as a creative writing major, and thinking I might, go into law or writing or something. I took a psychology class, and I sort of got hooked and started volunteering in different research labs, and became really interested in learning how to do behavioral therapy with kids in particular, and how to do research that would improve the treatments that exist. And so I ended up going to graduate school at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And I was in a lab with Doug Woods, who is a real leader in developing comprehensive behavioral intervention for tics, or Cbit. And so at the time, when you start graduate school, if you're fortunate like I was, you get some kind of a gig that covers your stipend as a student. So you get some work to do while you're learning. And so the job that I had was to work on the Cbit trial. And so these were two large randomized controlled trials that were testing for the first time at a large scale how well Cbit worked for both adults and children with tics. And so my job was to be the coordinator for that site. So I was supposed to find people who were interested in participating in the study, to schedule their appointments, to meet them in the parking lot and give them their parking pass. And so that was my first entree into interacting with these families and the community. And I really loved working with those kids and families, and hearing their stories, and learning about what it's like to live with a relatively rare disorder that didn't have a lot of good treatment options at the time. So then that same semester, my first semester, Doug brought me along with him to this meeting, this scientific meeting that was put together by the Tourette Association of America. And their goal was to bring together a bunch of researchers who were interested in Tourette's to kind of figure out what the next few years of research would look like. And that meeting, it had so many amazing people in it that were from such a wide range of disciplines. So there were people from psychology, psychiatry, neurology, basic neuroscience. And as a 22-year-old who was just super excited to do science, it was this kind of exposure to these rock stars in Tourette science, and seeing like what I think is so special about the research community is it really is this collective of people from really different areas of scientific and clinical training that come together to tackle this really complex condition. And And I just got hooked to working with the families and working in this community. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
That is so cool. And talking about, kind of plotting out the next, few years of research, that was kind of the spirit of the summit in Minneapolis, the Treating Tourette Together Summit. Where are we on that? Like, I guess the point of it was to kind of arrive at some questions that all of us kind of agree. The researchers maybe agree, the providers maybe agree, and the people from the Tourette community themselves. What do we value? Why are we curious about these questions? And, what do we need to research, and how are we all really going to benefit from this? So it's not just satisfying like maybe random curiosities that maybe help, but are hard to immediately apply to the big picture. What did that summit produce, like in terms of questions and kind of understanding where we are?
I was super excited about the Treating Tourette Together Summit. That was definitely a huge professional highlight for me. So Treating Tourette Together, to fill in a little bit of background, was a project that was a collaboration between a few Tourette Cbit researchers around the country. So Matt Capriotti at San Jose State University, Shannon Bennett at Weill Cornell Medical Center, Mike Himley at the University of Utah, and me, and Diana Shinneman at the Tourette Association of America. And we had two other folks who helped us. Sarah Hamilton, who is an advocate for Tourette's and a parent of an adolescent with Tourette's, and Carolyn Hunt, who is expert in community engaged research. And so we came together with this idea that we've made a lot of advancements in terms of, I talked about my first job doing Cbit, and fast forward to 15 years later, now we do know that Cbit is a really effective treatment for Tourette's. It's currently, the recommendation is that this is the first line treatment that people with Tourette's receive, but we also know that it has limitations. Mm-hmm. We know that it's hard for people to get. We know that not everybody is interested in it. We know that not everybody benefits from it as much as they would like to. And so the impetus behind Treating Tourette Together was to sort of shake away some of this paradigm that researchers have operated under of like, we are the researchers, we will identify the interesting questions and come up with the next study, and to really take this more humble approach and this newer framework in research called patient-centered outcomes research. And the idea in patient-centered research is that you really partner with patients and other stakeholders as collaborators, as equals. So to say we as researchers have one set of knowledge, and you as people with lived experience have another set of knowledge that's equally important for us. And in order for research to really matter, because the goal is to improve the quality of life of people living with Tourette's. And in order for us to do that, we have to really hear from the community what you feel like you need, where you feel like research is and treatment are limited. Right. And so we were fortunate to get funding from the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute and to put together this summit. And so we had a huge survey that we did ahead of time. About 700 people responded and gave us some initial feedback about what they think about Cbit. And then we were able to bring together 45 people who included adults and teens living with Tourette's, parents, clinicians who work all over the country in different kinds of settings, as well as researchers. And so our goal was to bring everybody together to really figure out what should be the main questions that we focus on in the next generation of research on Cbit. Mm-hmm. It was really fun. Matt Capriotti, who I worked super closely with on the project, we joked that it was kind of like having a science wedding, because we were hosting with like our whole research family and like our community. And it was both like really exciting and kind of a blur.
Yeah, it's so cool. It really was an amazing group of people there too. I mean, people whose names I had, read as contributors to science, or at least the conversation that we're having now. And also knowing the overlap that some of the people who are directly involved in the research also have a direct personal connection to it, whether they have it themselves or it's in their family. So, I mean, you got to kind of get an appreciation for why that event was happening. It was really cool. So we're looking at kind of the objectives and everything and where we took them.
The first main area was how can we get Cbit to more people? And so access is a huge problem. We know that there are only a limited number of providers out there. A lot of them have long wait lists. How do we do things like get it to people who live in rural areas with technology like telehealth? So how do we get it to people who need it was the first area. The second major area we identified is how do we improve Cbit? And so a big concern that people have is Tourette's isn't just tics, and Cbit is really designed to manage tics. And so we need to figure out how do we improve the care that we do to more globally boost quality of life for people who are living with this and people who have some of the really common comorbidities that come along with it.
Yeah, it's interesting too with that Tourette definitely being more than tics and, being anxiety and depression and other factors that people deal with. But it still seems like Cbit could be an amazing tool to kind of help people gain a sense of confidence and controlling problematic tics or whatever you want to call them, tics that make your life feel more difficult than it needs to be. And if it's something that maybe you can kind of get around, then maybe some of these other, I'm just totally, and I am talking out of school, but just kind of thinking about my own life and kind of what sets me off, being in a position where I can kind of control more aspects of what I deal with that may, I guess, kind of incidentally lead to reduced stress or lead to, just more command in the situation when I otherwise might be kind of flaring up with anxiety or nerves about who's kind of observing me and what judgments are they making about me. And this is, a thought process that a lot of people with TS have. So it seems like that there could be some sort of like inverse benefits with that of dealing with anxiety and other issues just because you have developed more of a sense of command and confidence. And I think that was something that Maggie, she was a teenager and she's been on the podcast before with her mom, Denise, but I'm pretty sure, I hope I'm not misattributing, somebody in the room, and I think it was her, mentioned that kind of the sense of command that you could feel by getting good at something like Cbit.
Yeah. And a lot of times when I'm working with my own patients, I think it's important to help them see the goal of Cbit not as controlling tics or getting rid of tics. It's really about building skills that help you feel more confident and help you feel like you have the ability to live the life you want to live. And I think I see people when they do gain that ability to have some more voluntary control over their tics, they feel more confident walking into situations that might be challenging, like a job interview or a driver's test. And it's not to say that, like I tell people, it's okay to have tics. The goal is for the tics to not control your life, for you to control your life. And if having some ability to manage them better gives you more control, I think that's a real plus, and it really builds that resilience and confidence you're talking about.
Absolutely.
But I think the other big questions that kind of came out were around like what else. So how can we improve Cbit itself in terms of improving how well people respond to it? So as excited as we all are that we have this behavioral non-drug treatment that is a first-line option for people, the data also tell us that about half of people have a significant benefit, which is great if you're in that half, but it also means there's a lot of people who aren't really benefiting from it. So I think that's a big question for future research is what can we do with Cbit, or how can we add other treatments to Cbit to make it work better so more people get symptom relief. And I'm also interested in questions like, can we get it to work faster, and can we get it to work for longer, so that, if we can get people something that they can do quickly that gives them the relief they're looking for a long time, that would be a really nice outcome.
And when you mentioned kind of adding things to it, there may be people who have success with just pure Cbit, but maybe there is some sort of managed medication angle as well to pair up with it. Or, I mean, is that what we're talking about? Just sort of how can we use this, whether on its own or with other tools that we have to kind of get the best results for the individual?
Exactly. And I think what's really complicated in terms of treating Tourette's is that we have information from research that Cbit alone can work, that medications alone can work, and those tend to be the most common treatments people receive. But there's actually been no research that really tests the combination of those treatments. Yeah. So we don't have a lot of research to guide our decisions around who should start with which treatment and how best could they be combined. Are there other biological interventions that could boost Cbit efficacy? Mm-hmm. So for example, in my lab, we're getting interested in techniques that let us non-invasively change activity in certain parts of the brain. So using technologies that can directly boost brain activity in certain areas. So are there other ways that we can enhance the way the brain is able to kind of uptake Cbit?
Gotcha.
So it's both like, how do we thoughtfully pair and make treatment decisions with the treatments we have? And how do we also think about new technologies that might be out there?
How was the Tourette community kept in the loop, apprised, or kind of where are we?
We have the main report so far posted on the internet for people to look at. So if you go to treatingtourettetogether.org, there is a section there that has a summary of the findings for folks to read. So that's one big way for people to find out. I think, thank you for having me on the podcast. I think that's another way that we're hoping we can share that with folks. And we're working on, we have a longer, sort of more dense technical document about this that we posted a preprint of online. So that means it hasn't yet gone to a scientific journal or been peer reviewed, but that's up for people to look at. And we're currently working on trying to get that into a journal so that we also reach back to the scientific community, because we think it's equally important for us to take what we learned and share it with people living with Tourette's and sharing it with people who are doing the science, so that we make sure that the science that's being done really reflects the needs of the community.
A question that comes to mind, since you started with Tourette science, I mean, you've obviously seen probably a lot of changes in maybe scientific attitudes toward it, or kind of what our current understanding is, and I put that in quotes, or treatments that maybe aren't being used anymore because they've been abandoned. In your observation, like, have we made pretty big strides in understanding TS and treating it from where you started?
We definitely have. And so my own personal experience is reflecting on 15 years of time. And when I started, we were just testing Cbit at scale for the first time. So there was no option for non-drug treatment for Tourette's. And at the time, we also did some large internet surveys back when we first started using the internet to do research.
Yeah.
And we asked people what kinds of treatments they had received. And particularly among adults, a lot of people were receiving medications that we know can work for tics, but also have really significant side effects. So, for example, neuroleptic or antipsychotic medications. Yeah. So these are medications that work to reduce dopamine in the brain. And at the time, that was one of the most common treatments people were reporting. And then fast forward to now, we're in a place where the American Academy of Neurology, which sets the practice guidelines for neurologists in our country, they just released a recommendation last year that Cbit should be the first line treatment for people who have tics. So to have a medical community endorse a non-drug treatment is a huge change. And so we're also seeing a lot less people needing to take these kind of medications. They these neuroleptic or antipsychotic medications are now considered a third, line treatment after you have tried other things, that they're still available. But that has been a huge change just in terms of, I think, what treatment looks like. The other big changes I think are happening are even just our understanding of what causes Tourette's in terms of advances in neuroscience, in basic neuroscience about how does the brain work and what are the things that could be going on that are driving these symptoms that people have. Just the technologies in neuroscience have changed dramatically, which is letting us have whole new insights into the brain and how we might have more specific treatments. So, for example, a lot of the medications we have, it's kind of like you're really globally addressing something like a brain chemical. Like you take a drug and it kind of affects that chemical all over your brain. Yeah. What we're learning about Tourette's is it's really related to very specific circuits in the brain. And so people are starting to think more about, can we develop treatments that really more narrowly target those circuits so that we go right after either what's driving the tics or improve the parts of the brain that can control them in a way that doesn't expose people to lots of other kinds of side effects. And I think the last big thing I've seen change is just this advocacy around Tourette's and really the coming together of researchers in the Tourette's community. Like your podcast is actually a great example. So many people that I have worked with earlier on in my career, they had never talked to anyone who had Tourette's. They had no way of connecting with them.
Yeah.
They felt really alone, and they really struggled with advocating for themselves in their work, in their school. And I think, with the Tourette Association, with people who are, going solo as advocates on social media with your podcast, we're seeing this real surge of advocacy that I think is pushing the agenda with research and with just the global understanding of what Tourette's is in our bigger society, which has been really cool to see.
And one thing I think is important to cover here too is there's a lot of sort of identity surrounding Tourette and a lot of kind of pride in the disorder, we could say. And, people saying, if I could get rid of it, I wouldn't, because it's made me who I am. And I think it's important to clarify that the work you're doing is not about stomping that out or eradicating Tourette or anything that we might feel, personally proud of. It's about helping people to be the happiest they can be. And if there are, there are tics I have that I want to get rid of that are barriers to me. These breathing tics that I have that really interfere with me at the worst times, that inflame my asthma. And I may be proud of who I am, but there are parts of it I definitely want to control better. I think it's important to point out that, this is not like trying to eliminate a disability. It's about helping people to have access to the tools that they need to improve their lives. But this is not about any kind of narrative that Tourette is bad and we need to research our way to find the cure and get rid of it so nobody has to deal with this ever again. I like the positive approach and involving the community and considering the community's feelings and attitudes towards it. And
I think it's so important that we, on the science side of it, don't lose sight of that the goal is to help people with Tourette's live their best lives. And sometimes that means helping them directly with their tics. And sometimes it means being advocates for people in society to accept that some people are different from them, right? That I read, I don't remember the author of this, but it was an op-ed about Tourette's, and he had this statement of, sometimes I wish there was a medication that would make other people not care about my tics.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really powerful, that there is this component that is about just social acceptance. And so I think that we do have to really carefully hold both agendas in mind, that the science should be about helping people who have Tourette's live in a world that's more accepting and have options for them should they want to directly tackle the symptoms they're having. And I'm hopeful that initiatives like Treating Tourette together will help keep people's eye on the ball with that.
We'll be right back. The Tourette Association of America is the premier nonprofit working to raise awareness, advance research, and provide ongoing support to those with Tourette syndrome or tic disorder. With a network of over 130 chapters, support groups, and centers of excellence, the TAA engages with communities across the nation in an effort to provide tools, webinars, workshops, and support for all seeking assistance. As a primary sponsor of Tourette's podcast, the TAA supports the authentic conversations showcasing the diverse representation of the TS community. To learn more, visit tourette.org, tourette.org. You had mentioned, too, sometimes the concern over TS may complicate the lives of people who do deal with it. And you were telling me a story one time about dietary changes that are kind of like forced on kids to see if it can, kind of alleviate their tics. But, there's a cost that comes with that. There's like a weird trade-off. You may miss things that are important for you to experience in your life. And having a piece of pizza would be like a nice part of childhood. And
totally. And that's a conversation that whenever I'm working with people clinically, especially kids, the first question I always want people to be clear on is like, who is this treatment for? Yeah. And why are you choosing to take on something? And especially for kids who sometimes have less say in what kind of interventions their parents want them to do, I think it's important to balance that. Like, how much are the tics themselves getting in the way? Are they even bothering the person that's living with them? Plenty of people who are perfectly happy, successful people with their tics, and that's okay. And what are the pros and cons of these other things that are out there? And I think a particular challenge I see in the Tourette's community is one that's common to other kinds of neurological conditions that are rare and that don't have a cure, is that kind of leaves a void for. It creates a sense of desperation for a lot of people. No one wants to suffer. No one wants to see their loved ones suffer. And sometimes that leads people to try things because that may not be evidence-based or backed by science, because they're just hopeful that something might work. And I think the risk in that I've seen is sometimes people trying these different techniques or so-called interventions in an attempt to reduce tics, and sometimes losing sight that those strategies might themselves be causing more impairment than the tics. So the story you're thinking of is one I hear about a lot, where people try dietary alterations to change their tics. And so far, we don't have good research that shows us that impacts tics. We think it's really caused by these neural circuit issues in the brain that aren't likely to be impacted by certain foods. But I've seen people who take on these, and I always encourage people, like, if you think it might be helpful, consider the pros and cons of doing this and monitor it and make a decision for yourself if it's working or not. But I remember this child who the family was trying these different dietary alterations, and him just looking at me at one point and saying, like, sometimes I just think I would be happier eating a piece of pizza than coming and working on my tics. He wasn't allowed to eat pizza because of this strategy the family was trying. So I think it's a tough balance for people, right? To figure out, how do I navigate making choices in the absence of a cure? And my hope as a scientist and as someone who does some advocacy around this is to help people in the community understand what the science says so that they can make informed choices.
It's a legit valid statement to say the quality of my life and my happiness right now is not quite what it should be. And maybe if I can kind of give this a go, my ticks are not quite the end of the world. People around me need to understand them better. So that part of the stress, the social stress, I'm not feeling quite as much, but otherwise I'm good. And am I making these changes for the people around me, or am I doing it for myself? And, that's a really valid statement to say, like, I would rather just kind of be eating pizza and just kind of like having fun and laying back. And if you have a problem with my ticks, then, that's a conversation you can have with yourself. But I also you made a comment about people who maybe go to unevidenced treatments. I put that in quotes, but, and I feel for people who, like really do want to make a change in their lives, and all the legitimate treatments have not really gotten them where they want to be. And it creates a situation of vulnerability to where people, may shell out significant money towards something that is maybe completely bogus, or maybe is just is only supported by anecdotal evidence, or may have, some other nefarious effort behind it. Because, if there's a vulnerable population, there's someone kind of standing in the wings waiting to sell them some kind of snake oil to improve their lives. And it's difficult to sometimes know when you have all kinds of hope that something out there might work, and you've heard about this thing, and it's like, well, it's $100, I'll give it a try. And I say that because I feel for people who are in those situations, but I still think it's important to kind of keep up with the research and where it is. And I mean, it's hard for all of us to be scientists and experts on everything, but the sort of critical thinking aspect of it, of, how did I learn about this quote unquote treatment, and who's telling me about this, and what is the evidence, and is it really worth me spending this money on this thing that may or may not help me? And it's always a gamble when you're taking medications that are on the market too. I mean, there's side effects. It's not pleasant, but.
And as a scientist, I think one of the challenges, it is a really, really complicated condition.
Yeah.
And I think anything that simplifies it is something to be skeptical about. Anything involving the brain is going to be immensely complicated. Mm-hmm. It's the most complicated organ we have, and we there's so much that we don't understand about it. And on the one hand, that is exciting for science, mm-hmm. that we have so many things that we can learn, but it also it does make me have deep empathy for what it's like when you're living with this and you can't wait mm-hmm. 10, 20 years for the science to happen. So, I encourage people to look at resources like the Tourette Association of America has a science and medical advisory boards that help provide and vet the information that is on there. The American Academy of Neurology has these really nice statements about what the current evidence is for different treatments for Tourette's. And I think just to be informed about what those are, and to know that if you're trying something that hasn't been tested, to have a sense of kind of careful skepticism of maybe if you're willing to try it. What I always encourage people to do is before you try something new, take a couple of weeks and really track your symptoms to get a really good baseline of where you're at. And then set ahead of time when you're going to make a decision about whether to stop or not. Give yourself a month and then really track it and try to be your own scientist, because you're right. As much as I want to do all the science to figure out all these things and test everything, we can't do that. And I think empowering people to be their own scientists and kind of take some of the principles we use as scientists to, measure something, to test it out, can be a helpful way of trying to figure out for yourself more objectively if something is worth it to do.
So how can the Tourette community take more of an active role in what you guys are doing, the kind of research you're doing, kind of in the spirit of us all kind of being on the same page and working together, I guess? Or
that's a great question. And I think a lot of scientists would be really excited to have more interactions with the community as partners in doing the science. So the first big kind of area I think we can collaborate on is just engaging with each other more. And some specific ideas for how the community can engage with scientists are first, find us in places like social media. So there are a lot of Tourette scientists that have a presence and that use platforms like Twitter, for example, to share results about their studies. One fun example, I think, is something you and I did, Ben, where I had posted something on Twitter about a study I saw where they were proposing to rename Tourette's. And some of the conversations that you and I had over Twitter with a couple other people actually turned into a paper that we published in a scientific journal. So that
was awesome.
It was awesome. It was a really fun example of how just some engagement over this platform got us talking and let us put some ideas back into the scientific literature.
Was it tic spectrum disorder was what the proposal was? Is that right?
Yeah. So there's a group out of Europe that was proposing to rename it tic spectrum disorder. And I was sort of agnostic about it, which is why I posted about it on Twitter, because I wanted to hear from people who are living with tics what they thought about it. And for me, having that dialogue over social media actually sparked a lot of thinking that I wouldn't have otherwise had as a scientist, that I thought were really important to bring back to the community. And so it turned into a paper, and also one of the authors was able to present about it at the European Tourette conference.
Yeah, that was cool. Laura.
Laura did.
Laura Bellios.
So I think it was just a nice example of how, if you're interested, a lot of us are in those platforms and excited to engage. So I do have on my Twitter page, I keep a list of Tourette scientists. So if people are interested, that's one place they can go to find all the people that are on there.
Yeah. Where can people find it? So you're at Conelea, is that right?
Yeah, that's at Conelea. And if you look at my lists, I have a list of Tourette scientists, and they're all, not everyone who does Tourette science is on there, but I try to keep a list of people who are on there. And it's a nice way to follow the science, because I think Twitter is one place where people present science in a way that's a little more digestible. And where you can also ask questions. And that brings me to my next point, which is just finding other ways to engage with us directly. So for example, if you come across a scientific paper that someone has written, feel free to email us. If it's behind a paywall, email us, ask us to send it to you. We don't make money off of it. We like sharing it. Ask us questions. And ask if you're coming across work of a scientist that you find particularly interesting, or you think you might have a perspective about, it's worth reaching out and asking them if they have community advisors, or even if they would be willing to start something like that. If you could play a role in sharing some ideas you have. Not science is can be a tough game in that we have a lot of things we're interested in. We can't do all of them, but I think a lot of scientists are eager to at least make sure that we're thinking of how to shape the research in a way that's most beneficial to the community.
I guess that there may be some sort of intimidation factor sometimes when it comes to stuff that seems kind of thick, like science, like maybe jargon. And it's sometimes I kind of make the analogy of, so in my day job, I work with local governments, and I think there's a perception on the outside with the citizenry, and it may be true in some small cases, but that the people involved with government are like, we got this, or it kind of feels sort of like the cold steel doors of City Hall. And, it doesn't feel like there's much of a link between the public sometimes and the people who make the decisions for them. But if you kind of go into that and talk to people who work in a City Hall, they're really happy to have people kind of come in and participate. And they have these, citizen committees that they set up. And so people can be more integrated into the processes that are there to affect them and are there to help them. So it's really cool to see kind of the hand from the science community, which has probably always been there, but let's talk. We can do cool things together. So this is a really cool directory.
I think that's a great point, and it brings me to the other big category of how I think our communities can engage better, and it is around participation in the research. So in a study of Tourette's, a ton of time and resources get spent on trying to recruit people to participate in the study because it is a, relatively rare disorder. Not every person fits the criteria for every study. And I think if people listening are interested in helping advance the science, thinking about, studies you might be comfortable or eligible to participate in, is a way for us to get the science done faster so that we can get the results back to the community faster. And if you do participate in a study, there are ways to kind of go above and beyond just being a participant. So one is give us feedback about your experience. So one example is, a study that I was doing, and I had a family give me feedback that some questions I had in a form didn't really fit their particular family structure. And I was like, oh my, you're right. Totally. I was just sort of, sometimes we're blind to our own work. Right. And it was something I wasn't able to change for their experience, but I've changed for every other study I've done since. So getting that kind of feedback from people can make a huge difference for the quality of work we do down the road. Another thing you can do is if you participate and you have a good experience, or if you see something that you think is interesting, sharing that information with other people is really helpful to us. We know that the Tourette community has some tight bonds through support groups, and being champions for science within your networks can be a great way to help us make sure that we're able to do these science projects and get the results out to the community.
And plus, I think it's just a really encouraging thing because people sometimes put forward the suggestion that, well, it's still a huge mystery. And yeah, it's a huge mystery, but like they have no idea what's going on, or, there's no real science on this. I'm like, well, yeah, there is. We just don't talk about it enough within the community, or maybe aren't as aware, or maybe you're just kind of like one of these people like me who, I've had Tourette syndrome my whole life, but I've only been really active with it and been more curious about it within the past couple of years or so.
I think that's a great point. And it makes me think about, there's this cool organization that's called Skype a Scientist, where they have, just scientists that can sign up to be tapped for, classrooms or things like that. But, as you're interacting in these different communities you're in, if they're a support group, either virtually or in person, and these questions are coming up, that could be a good way to engage with us, is reach out and ask us to come, do even a virtual session with your group and answer some questions. I know I am really happy to hear questions people have, and it's really important to a lot of us that the work that we do doesn't stay stuck in the shelves of like dusty libraries.
Right.
It's actually getting out to the community. So if you are in a group like that and you're coming across a lot of questions, look around, ask someone if they're willing to do a webinar or a video chat and answer some questions you have, or a written Q&A. I think a lot of us would be really excited to have that opportunity and to be able to have that dialogue with the community.
Thanks for listening. You can learn more about Dr. Conelea by way of tourettespodcast.com. I'll be linking to her information in the show notes with this episode at @CConelea on Twitter. That's spelled at CCONELEA. Give me your feedback, tourettespodcast@gmail.com. Send a voice memo if you'd like. I love that because I can just play it on the show. Thanks to the Tourette Association of America for giving the support that continues to make this podcast possible. Tourette.org to learn more and to support the work they do. Again, TouretteConference.org to review what just happened at the virtual conference. It was great. And Tourette Awareness Month continues through June 15th. Tag the podcast in your awareness messages. I would love to follow. Thanks again for listening. This is Ben.